Brooks Matthews, welcome to the Path to Follow podcast. This is episode number 6. We're really excited to have you today. We're gonna talk about all the things: Gilman, lacrosse, sports, COVID, whatever it is that comes up here. And you are a Gilman alum. You have Gilman in your blood, just like Ned Emila does, and he was on here too. And we're looking forward to covering everything today. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jake. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to watch these first podcasts, and so thank you for inviting me on.
Awesome, excellent. So what's going on with you? What's new? How's the year been so far?
Yeah,
in COVID.
Yeah, it's different. You know, you felt like after the spring, and you know what that was like, trying to do remote teaching, connected learning, as we love to call it, and you know we all did so much kind of work over the summer, and you know to kind of prepare for this year. And like a lot of things, in the world right now, you do all that preparation, and then as soon as the rubber meets the road, it's like some of that stuff just flies out the window, and you're back to kind of trying to figure everything out as you go.
Right.
And that's certainly the case with hybrid. Hybrid learning, having half the kids in the classroom and half at home is a really challenging vibe. It's more challenging than having everybody at home, truthfully.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and I've asked my classes actually. I've said, who are the teachers that are doing a really good job with this hybrid learning model, and just so I can get some feedback and try to figure out what I can do a little bit better in there. And a lot of guys were saying Coach Matthews has it down. So what exactly are you doing? What's the secret?
Yeah, I don't know. They must be just they must have just come from my class, so my mind was my name was fresh in their mind, because truthfully, it has been really challenging. I've found myself, because I have kids in the classroom, right, wanting to connect with those kids in the classroom, right? Like that's the whole point, right? Like people want to be in the classroom because you want that relationship. You want to get to know those kids, and obviously we've all talked about the different dynamic from last spring, right, where we knew the kids really well by the time we had to go home, and this is the exact opposite. We don't know these kids barely at all.
Right.
And we're trying to figure them out as well as teach,
Yep.
as well as, oh, by the way, let's learn some of the routines that we have in this classroom, right? And there's nothing routine.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter in what fashion you are, right? There's no routine right now as much as we would love there to be.
Yep.
So when I've found myself trying to do some of the things that I would normally do, even though I've got kids on Zoom, and I'm realizing, right, that you can't do that. So it's been a challenge to figure out the right touch with hybrid. So things I've been doing that do seem to be somewhat useful, I'm trying to incorporate some of the tools we did learn last spring, like on Canvas. It's such a powerful tool, and it's too bad that we had to have a pandemic to learn all the different capabilities of that tool. But something like even doing a discussion via the Canvas discussion board, even though I've got kids in the classroom, right? Yep. It feels unnatural to do
for sure
an online discussion when I've got 7 kids in front of me, and so I'm not doing that all the time, but I have done that, and that's worked okay, because you don't have that discrepancy of guys at home. The guys at home have to contribute. They have to be on it, right? Whereas sometimes they're just not listening. You can tell they're not listening, even though they want to be listening, or they've got distractions. And so, the Canvas discussion, for example, has worked at times. I haven't used it a bunch, but it's worked. Videos, can't show videos. In this hybrid.
I've been wanting
form.
to do some movies, and I'm sure it's the same in a history class. You want to do clips and movies, and that's just so hard to do that.
And certainly not the way I'm used to doing it,
yeah.
Right? And so those you have to almost pre-produce and say, watch this on your time, which is a fine thing to do, right? But again, it just gets to what's been really hard for all of us, is just the amount of time it takes to plan all this stuff, and then the grading mounts up. So
that's huge, right?
Yeah. So it's it's been hard, but we're all getting better from it, and
sure.
And one of the things that's so true, and I've said this about a lot of things over the years, right? The kids are way more resilient than the adults. The kids, they kind of bounce back and figure things out. So even though this is a really unfortunate experience for them, and I have a daughter who's a freshman in college, right? So she's felt that kind of brunt of losing second half of her senior year. Now she's virtual in her first year of college. These kids are going to be okay, mm-hmm. right? Like the adults are the ones that struggle to adjust more quickly than the kids do. So kind of that helps me remind myself, like, the kids are going to stay with me, as long as I'm giving them something viable and something interesting, and they'll be right on it.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit on the podcast with Drew about being adaptable and just bringing some kind of energy to the classroom that they can feed off of, because I think that the high school guys especially are very adaptable, and they're getting things down. And if something, if you forget to post something on Canvas, or sometimes I forget to, put the deadline in, they just say, Mr. Scott, you forgot this, and I figure it out. So they've been really good with it, I'd say.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it's been going all right so far. Yesterday was a bit of a weirder schedule. Wednesdays we're bringing in everybody at once, so we're trying to slowly move back into a full kind of school environment. And I don't know, how'd that go for you?
So I kept it pretty low key. So I taught 4 of the 6 periods, as it were, right? So I didn't get outside to the intramurals because I was teaching, and I didn't get into the character ed stuff, but I felt a good vibe. I had the kids do some reading actually in class.
That's great.
Because I'm a believer that sometimes they just don't stop enough to read, and we were starting a research project, and whenever we start a research project, I always have them just do some reading before they start taking notes. They always want to just dive in, take the notes, tell me what I got to do.
Yep.
So, we just did some reading during part of the class yesterday, and I think that went well for me. It felt like it went well for them, but there was definitely good energy on campus yesterday with having so many of the upper schoolers here.
Yeah, and I really like the intramural sports during the middle of the day. I think that, I kind of like that in general, just to get outside and go play some cornhole on the tennis courts and some spike ball, just a nice little break from being in the room.
It was awesome to look out my office window and see like the volleyball nets lined up on the grass field over there, and like, I don't know, it was like 12 spike ball things, whatever you call those, the nets for the kids to play. It was awesome. It was cool.
Spike ball is going to be the next interscholastic sport here. We're getting good.
And our GTV is ready to cover it whenever they want to do a spike ball tournament. GTV is going to be right there.
Absolutely. So, Coach Matthews, you are a Gilman born and bred. You grew up in Baltimore. You went to Gilman. I think you took some time off, but then you came right back and started teaching and coaching here in the middle school. And I want to get into that a little bit and talk to you about really what Gilman means to you, and why you are still here. Why do you love this place?
Yeah, it's obviously a huge part of my life. Interestingly enough, and this is a funny story, the people kind of knowing me a little bit, but if they don't know this, like, I actually went to McDonough for 2 years before I came to Gilman.
Really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and so I was in public school and elementary school, and our school closed after 4th grade, and a friend of my mom's worked at McDonough, kind of advocated for it. Mm-hmm. McDonough had the bus system back then that they do now, and I was the 3rd child, right, the youngest, and my mom was like, I can put my kid on a bus.
Yep.
I'm going to do that. So
that's what all the moms are thinking right now.
What mom didn't realize was, I was playing rec soccer and rec lacrosse, and the afternoon bus didn't get me home in time. So she was still having to drive out there to get me on those days when I had to do rec soccer and rec lacrosse. And, it was McDonough was, going from public school to a private school. I was a little bit intimidated. There's no doubt. I was a quiet kid. So I just kind of put my head down and kind of did pretty well academically, played sports, which I loved. And then, like, the beginning of my 6th grade year, right, I'd been there a year plus a little bit. I was finally kind of starting to feel comfortable. My mom says to me one day, hey, this Saturday we're going over to Gilman. You're gonna do a test over at Gilman. I'm like, what? It's like, I'm supposed to hate them.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean I'm going over to Gilman to do a test? And I cried, actually, like when they told me I was going to Gilman, because I was like, I just got comfortable here. This is our rival, but parents know best, right? Like, it was the best move for me. I came in 7th grade, which was a big entry point because Calvert ended in 6th grade.
Okay.
At that time. So 7th grade was a huge entry point at Gilman. And I knew a bunch of Calvert kids because I'd played rec sports with them. So I felt pretty comfortable right away. Just so many people here, so many wonderful people, right, that had a huge influence on me that you don't even realize necessarily at the time because you're a kid and you don't know, you don't get it.
Yep.
But as you become an adult and you start to hear yourself, right? Like, that's one of the things, like, when I did get into teaching and coaching, and things would come out of my mouth and I was like, where did that come from? And then, like, I think about it a little bit and I was like, oh, that was Mr. So-and-so, or that was Mrs. So-and-so from this class, or that was Coach whoever, right? Like, and you start to understand, like, the impact, right, that teachers can have on you. And it's just been, I tell people often I'm lucky because I get to go to work doing something I love to do. And if you can find that in life, man, you're really lucky. And I feel really lucky because I've been able to do what I love.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. And how did you kind of realize that? So while you're in school, you went to college, and we'll talk a little bit about UNC. But after you graduated, how did you know that you wanted to come back?
I didn't. Part of the reason I went to North Carolina was because they have a great journalism school, and that's what I wanted to major in. So, got my degree in broadcast journalism, and was fortunate enough to get an interview, and then got offered a 6-month internship that ESPN runs. So I actually, out of college, I had a job, which is awesome. And not only did I have a job, right, I had a job at ESPN, which is like, anybody who's into sports, right, is a dream job coming out of college. And they had this 6-month internship program, and I got into it and kind of learned to do a little bit of everything in the production end, working on SportsCenter pretty much every day. Did that. And then after 5 months, they tell you, okay, you have a job permanently now, or, hey, put your resume together. We're not going to be able to keep you, but, we'll help you try to get a job somewhere else.
Yep.
So I was able to stay on there. And it was great. And I did a lot of cool things, covered a Final Four one year, mostly worked on SportsCenter, but got to go out in the field once to cover college hoops Final Four, which was awesome. Made all the better because it was the year that Arkansas beat Duke. So always good to see Duke lose.
That is great. It's perfect for you.
Exactly. Probably about, after being there about a year and a half or so, one of the things that you can see is, you can see the track, you can see the development. And I thought I wanted to be on air, but I put together like a tape, like a mini SportsCenter tape kind of thing that I would send out to small markets around the country that were looking for a sports guy. Didn't really get any bites on that. So then it's like, okay, so now I see the production track. Do I want to stay with this? And the answer was, I go into work, and there was a lot of good things about the job. Obviously, being someone who loves sports, it was great, and I got to meet a bunch of cool people. Got to work with Dan, Patrick, and Keith Olbermann on the big show, the 11:30 SportsCenter, which was like a biggie, the big show at the time, as they called it. So I got to do a lot of really cool things, but what I realized too was that I was going in, I was working hard, and I was putting together like 2-3 minutes of sports television. That's what I did on a daily basis. It just didn't feel very important.
It's a lot of work for kind of a small.
And the work was fine. I pride myself on being a hard worker. That part didn't bother me. It was just like, to what end, right? For what purpose? And the other thing was like, there's no feedback, right? Like, it's like you put together this tape, and like you thought about it, you worked really hard on it, you hand it over to the tape operator, and it might as well go into a black hole. You don't know if people at home laughed, turned it off, hated it, loved it, whatever, right? And So, teaching and coaching was something that was also of interest to me. When I finished playing lacrosse in college, I didn't really have much interest in playing anymore. I wanted to get into coaching. And so I did a little coaching on the side when I was working at ESPN. And so, Arch Montgomery was the headmaster, and I didn't know him from Adam because he came in after I'd left. But he was great. He met with me, told me what to do with my resume, and then walking out the door, he's like, make sure you send one to us before, when it's all done. And so, I got lucky because they took a chance on me. No education background, but they hired me for a middle school English job, broadcast journalism degree, right? I could teach English. Mm-hmm. It was great. And then, the rest is kind of history, right? I just kind of got into it and loved it and been able to do it since.
Excellent. That's awesome. And you were in the middle school, right, when you started out?
I was in the middle school. Ron Culbertson was the head of the middle school. He'd been my math teacher when I was a student in the middle school. And, boy, you talk about like mentors and path to follow, right? Like, mm-hmm. Whatever I do well as a teacher, I can probably directly attribute to Ron Culbertson.
Wow. What was he like? I never got to meet him.
So he was a master teacher, and unlike some master teachers, he was also able to transition to become an excellent administrator as well. And he was. I think some people found him tough to work for, but again, this is where athletics is such a bonus, right? Like, if you play sports, you're used to dealing with challenging people who challenge you.
Yep.
And people who can be blunt, and I think that some people found that difficult, but there was no question, right, that he put the best interest of the kids first, and that's something that I learned from him, and I find myself saying to people, right, when we're talking about changes or we're talking about anything that we're doing, like, well, what's best for the kids? Mm-hmm. Because that's our job, right, is to figure out what's best for the kids, not what's best for a constituent of this school, right? Some force, some group of people that isn't students, right? It's not about what they want necessarily. It's about what's best for the kids. And Ron Culbertson was all about that. And he wasn't afraid to make a fool of himself in front of the kids, which was perfect for middle schoolers, right?
They love that.
They love that. They feed off energy. Middle schoolers are energy. You have to have energy to teach middle school.
Right.
So on the teaching front, right? Like, yeah, he was a great observer and give you great feedback on your teaching. So yeah, I learned a lot from him, no doubt.
Great. And yeah, going off that middle school point, I teach in the upper school. I teach 11th grade like you do, and I don't know if I can imagine teaching middle school. Like, I do lacrosse lessons and stuff with some of these younger guys, and they have so much energy. They're bouncing off the walls. They want to wrestle. They want to fight. They want to tackle each other. How did you, as like a 24, 25-year-old guy coming back, get some control over that classroom and try to figure out how to teach middle school kids?
Yeah, that's where again, I think being an athlete really helped, right? Yeah. And having had so many great coaches and teachers, right? Like, you understand presence, you understand, the power of, raising your voice potentially. Yeah. I know that there are some stories from some alums they like to tell me from when I was a young teacher about some things that I did that, someone like, we were scared of you. It's like, well, that's not, it worked out okay.
Yeah, it's necessary.
At times, it's okay.
You need to play on fear a little bit.
Yeah. But just, again, more seriously, right? Like, just understanding your role, as the leader in that classroom. Yep. And what that means, right? And that there's a time and a place for almost anything, right? And there's a time to have fun. There's a time to be silly, right? But then there's a time to sort of buckle down. And we're very lucky because Gilman kids kind of inherently get that. Yeah. They want to be pushed. They want to succeed. They want to work hard. They want to be challenged.
They're here for a reason.
Yeah. And that gives us a lot of leeway, ability, and strength as teachers to be creative and to push them and to be effective.
Absolutely. And your coaching career, did that start off in the middle school too, or did you start off coaching lacrosse there and then move up to the upper school, or how did that play out?
Yeah, kind of classic old school, work your way up a little bit. Yeah, when I was hired, I was immediately asked to coach the interscholastic middle school team, which was great. I was really thankful for that opportunity. At the same
head coach.
Head coach. Yeah, and we did it. At that time, it was 7th and 8th graders could try out. So you had the best 7th and 8th graders making the interscholastic team, and just one team in the middle school. And in addition to that, I would because middle school then also practiced before the upper school, so I would do the middle school practice and then I would hang around. And initially was working as an assistant with the JV team, did that for a couple of years, then was an assistant with the varsity team for a bunch of years, doing both like middle school and high school. And then when at some point, Coach Allen asked me to basically run the defense for the varsity team. So at that point, I just kind of stepped away from middle school because it was, a lot of responsibility. I needed that time, before practice. And then when Dave Allen retired, the school hired me to be the head varsity coach. So, I mean, I was lucky too, right? Like timing sometimes is everything, right? My first year in the middle school, we had a 7th grader come to Gilman that year. His name was Ryan Boyle.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, so he was on my first team, as a middle school head coach. I've got Ryan Boyle on attack. Could do some things.
It's amazing to me how well he understood the game. Like he was. I don't know. Just from what you've told me, he was a coach in 7th grade, and now I'm watching the PLL and everything. My dad and I watched the PLL a lot this summer, and everything that we were talking about before a play happened or as a play was developing, Ryan Boyle says right afterwards, like in clear, perfect layman's terms for people who've never watched lacrosse before. Yeah. He just has a natural kind of gift for understanding the game in a simplistic way. Yeah,
and here's a guy, he's a 3-sport athlete, and that's, I've heard you talk about that on earlier podcasts, right? The value of the 3-sport athlete, right? The guy he was a quarterback on the football team who called his own plays by the senior year, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? He was a point guard on the basketball team, right? So the ball's in his hand all the time, right? And he's a classic ex-attackman, right? Like kind of understanding the offense and running the offense, and it's no surprise that that Trilogy Lacrosse that he and a Gilman classmate of his started a long time ago, right? Like that they are branded themselves as lacrosse education, right? And that's exactly what they are, right? Like, and he does a wonderful job of that because of his understanding of the game and also his understanding of kids, right? Yeah. He understands how to communicate with kids too, which is awesome. It's too bad that we weren't able to get him here, but
it would have been great.
Yeah.
Who are some of the other kind of players that you have really enjoyed coaching, or some of the best players that you've coached over the years here at Gilman?
Oh man, the character of these kids is tremendous, and like, I mean, it's so, again, I feel so lucky, right? Like having some guys who, will tell stories about things that I don't really remember, but they remember, and right, like, so, obviously some, Marcus Holman has gone on to have just a tremendous career as a Team USA player and playing in the PLL. And, it was, he was back here at campus about a year ago doing something. And, he texted me and he's like, I'll be on campus. So we'll go out there, and he's telling me this story. He's like, you remember the time we were practicing in the mud? It's like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, sort of. Like, there was a lot of mud around here back then.
Right.
And he's like, I wasn't like I wasn't like scooping the ball off the ground because I didn't want my stick to get muddy. And he's like, and you saw that, and you came over, and you grabbed my stick, and you looked at it, and then you just went, and you put it right in the mud, and just kind of scraped it around in there, and then picked it up and said, here, I think it'll be okay now.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That completely reminds me of in college, we were playing a game. I think it was Albany on a Saturday, and it was supposed to rain that day. And on like Thursday at practice or Wednesday at practice, all our coaches come out with buckets of water. They're like, dunk your sticks, like get them ready to go. You can't have any whip in that stick for Saturday.
Yeah. So that was a fun group. Jack Doyle, Brian Carroll, going back to my first couple years as head coach. Brian Carroll was an old school, do it all, thick, strong, super athletic kid. Did things on the lacrosse field I've never seen before.
Was he Virginia?
Yeah, he went to Virginia and became the all-time leading scoring midfielder in Virginia history.
Against Maryland in that like eight overtime game that one year, he had the game winner.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And again, just a humble kid, hardworking, just great player, great kid, great individual. Barney Ehrman, Joey Ehrman running around out here on these fields, like, Joey Ehrman just doing a number on Steel Stanwick, taking the kid out of games.
Wow.
This flood of names. Got fortunate enough to have coached my two nephews, which was really cool. They're just a lot of great players that that the Doyle family, right? Yeah. Like I got to coach all of them, from Kevin, right, who's the oldest and a Navy SEAL now, to Casey, who was my advisee and graduated last year, so. And Jack Doyle, who did some things on the lacrosse field, that I haven't seen before either. So there's just a lot of great memories, a lot of great individuals. I feel fortunate. Jake Mathai, right, like another just superhuman person.
Yeah, for
first, sure. Right, and then and oh, by the way, right, like fantastic leader and lacrosse player.
Yeah, and you walk down the hallways here at Gilman, you see his art still up, which is cool. So he was a very multi-talented guy.
No doubt.
So it's definitely some great players that you had the opportunity to coach and get to know. And I was thinking about this question as we were coming over here. All those guys that you mentioned, definitely talented, skilled, loved lacrosse, but what is it that really separated them as leaders or great teammates? I know Marcus Holman, one thing that I always say, and I'd love to get him on the podcast too, it would be great to talk to him, but one thing when I watched him play at UNC, he would always ride to the midfield line. And that's a part of the game that not everyone picks up, especially younger kids. They just see the shooting and the faking and the behind the backs, but he doesn't take any rides off. So what are some of those intangibles that you really kind of have been able to notice having been a coach?
I think the right common denominator there is just competitiveness.
Yeah.
Right. These guys they loved the game. They loved their teammates. They loved Gilman, and it showed in how they played. Right. A lot of people say those things, but the guys that do it right are the ones that have that sort of embody what we're looking for and what we're trying to get everyone to understand, right? Like, one of the things I used to say all the time is we can't do anything we want to do on the field until we are consistently playing our hardest or close, playing at a high level of intensity and effort. Because that's what it takes to be successful in a game like lacrosse. There's the speed and the athleticism that is required. You can't slow down to do things. You have to do them at your top speed, your top intensity. And so until we kind of prove that we can be that way consistently, like we can't really worry about running plays, diagramming offenses, scheming defenses, right? Like we just have to play hard first.
Yeah, all that other stuff is secondary.
Yeah, and those guys set the tone for that. Guys like and they pass it down. It gets passed down, right? So it goes from Brian Carroll to Jack Doyle, right, to Connor Doyle, right, and Jake Mathai, right, and so on, to Andy Matthews and Jack Halpert, from that era, right? Like it just gets passed down, and that's one of the things that I loved about coaching year after year was seeing those relationships form and then seeing, right, them pass. It's like first take care of the younger guys. I think that's one of the things our guys do really well here is they take care of the younger guys. They bring them in. It's not let's see what we can do to the freshmen. It's let's see how we can bring them in and bring them up to speed as fast as we can.
And that's so important, not only at Gilman in the lacrosse program, but also just in Gilman in general. Like the first day convocation, you have the seniors walking across the field with the pre-K, right? I think that mentorship part is central to who we are here.
Yeah, indeed. And again, it's a great way. Mentorship is a great way to impart, right, those values that we hold. You got to model it. You got to and look, kids, right, whether they're dealing with other kids or they're dealing with adults, kids have BS detectors, the finest that exist, right? And they know if you're genuine and they know if you're not, right? And that makes a big deal. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've learned in these past 2-3 years since coming here. As a 22-year-old right out of college, I kind of thought that I had to be kind of, set the tone so I didn't get too buddy with these guys because they're only a couple years younger than I am. And I always really hated when there was an authority figure that tried to be my friend, and then all of a sudden you thought you were boys with him, and all of a sudden he's yelling at you. So I tried to kind of set that persona, but it just does not work. Like in that first year when I was here, and I've realized, it's just better to be your genuine self, and people can totally see you as you are. But great. So when you were here playing sports and going to school here growing up, who were some of the figures that you looked to as mentors?
Yeah. So, again, I had so many, and really feel fortunate about that. My 7th grade and 8th grade history teacher was Shanti Kumar.
I love him. I need to get him on this podcast.
And he, by the way, also was the varsity soccer coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I had him, as was one of my first teachers that I had when I got here, right? And then he's the head soccer coach when I get to the upper school, which was pretty wild. And he was great. And still, like you said, it's great to see him still a part of Gilman. Timmy Holly, who wasn't here when I was a student, but when I came back to teach, has been a real influence. When I was here as a student, one of the things that I learned about Gilman was that people who you didn't think knew you, right? So Sherm Bristow was the football, basketball coach, baseball coach, and an athletic director. I didn't play any of those sports, but he knew who I was. Mm-hmm. And Reddy Finney, my 9th grade year, right? He's the headmaster. I don't expect Reddy Finney to know who I am as a 9th grader, right? And I'm kind of standing by the mailboxes one day, kind of probably looking lost, and he just kind of comes up to me and he puts that big old hand on my shoulder and makes me feel like I'm gonna crumple because like he's so strong and he doesn't know it, or he knew it and that was part of his thing. I don't know which it was, but he's like, "Hey Brooksy, how you doing today?" And I was like, "Whoa!" I don't even know if I said anything because I was like, Reddy Finney knew my name. That was the aura of Reddy Finney.
Starstruck.
Yeah, so watching how he did things, right? I learned a lot from that. Guys in the classroom like a Peter Julius, who was a history teacher, and was kind of a character at the same time, right? Like he's a guy who was we wanted him in 9th grade study hall because he was so funny, mm-hmm. right? But then he was also incredibly well read, smart, understood a lot of things, and took a senior elective history class from him, was just really cool. Jody Martin was the lacrosse coach, my junior and senior year, so obviously I learned a lot from him, who also taught history. So just a lot of good people going about their job the way that you see people doing now, right? And kind of embodying the Gilman ethos of body, mind, body, spirit, and
passion.
So it's I soaked it up, and one of the strange things was once when I became a teacher, right? like at some point, probably around like year 8 or 9, as being a teacher, I was like, wait a minute, I've been here longer as a teacher now than I was as a student. And that was like, wait a minute, how did that happen? And
time flies really
Yeah.
in teaching for some reason. I don't know if it's just the you're always
Yeah.
looking forward to what's next and constantly improving, but something, you're always engaged. Something just about it, just that it's already mid-October.
I was
crazy.
talking about that with my wife yesterday. I was like, how did it get to be October 20th or whatever?
October 20th today, yeah. Awesome. So you came back, you taught in the middle school for a little bit, and then you're in the upper school teaching history.
Yeah. 20 years in the middle school.
20 years in the middle school.
20 years in the middle
teaching
school.
English. Right?
English to start with.
Okay.
Then started getting interested in history.
So you weren't too into history before, or it was just kind of something you were doing on the side?
I think, well, English just made the most sense, when I started with the journalism degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been interested in history, but hadn't really thought too much about teaching history. My wife got a job teaching, and she was a history major in college, and so she got into history as a teacher. And then I started, becoming more interested. And then for like a couple of years, I was kind of like I was like a swingman in the middle school. It was like whatever they needed more of. I did some English, some history, kind of depended where they needed me more. In terms of whether I did more English or more history, but one of the, I think, one of the things that really got me going as a history teacher was reading Killer Angels and then going to the Gettysburg battlefield. I'd never gone there as a kid. And so as a young adult, when I read Killer Angels and then went to the battlefield and just could like see it, it was amazing. And then, got a grant from Gilman, and my wife and I did a like southern tour of Civil War and civil rights sites back in 2000. And we just got in the car and drove, I don't even remember how many miles it was, but it was, we stayed in like 17 different places or something. I mean, we were just like, just total road trip. And that kind of cemented it, a passion for history. And so then they, Mr. Culbertson said, we want you to take over the history department. Ned Clapp, longtime legendary history teacher, he wants to kind of step back from being the department chair. I was like, well, maybe I should teach all history instead of some English and some history. If you want me to be the department chair, I should probably become a little more versed in the curriculum. Right. So I went to history full time, then became the history department chair in the middle school for a bunch of years. And then, just decided, I looking for kind of a challenge, a new challenge, not that teaching middle school is a challenge, right? But looking for a new challenge, kind of reinvigorate my curriculum, my knowledge, my teaching chops, coaching varsity lacrosse. I probably should be in the upper school to be near the boys, just to be a little bit more present for them. And so made the switch to the upper school.
Awesome. And what's it been like teaching history in the upper school since then? What are your favorite kind of units, or is it all just, are you passionate about everything that you teach? Or are there certain times is it U.S. history, right?
So I teach, when I moved to the upper school, I taught 9th and 10th. So the 9th grade world cultures curriculum, and the 10th grade is now called Making Modern Europe.
Okay.
It's a big Euro-Civ kind of class.
Got it.
And I did that for a couple of years, but still, had a passion for U.S. history. So was able to sort of, when a spot opened up to teach some U.S. history after a couple of years, I did that. I switched from the 10th grade to the 11th grade to the U.S. history curriculum. And I love teaching the 9th graders because I know middle schoolers so well, right? So I know where they've been, and I feel like I can really help them transition to upper school, sort of life expectations, culture, those kinds of things, skills. I know what they've been taught in the middle school, right? Because I know what goes on in that middle school history department. So I know what they've been taught. So I feel like I can build on that right away with them. And so I like that part of teaching 9th graders. And then the U.S. history is my favorite of all our disciplines for sure. I like I've learned a lot because you know, in the 7th grade U.S. history curriculum, we were pretty pointed. We were pretty specific in what we taught, from the sense of, we knew the philosophy in the middle school was we want them to want to take history again, because it's not necessarily, you know, it's a core class in the upper school, but it's also a class that, right, like there's electives and things like that, and we want kids to be interested in history. We don't want to kill their interest in history in middle school, which is a lot easier to do than to fuel their interest.
Was that curriculum more structured or so regimented?
It was instead of so we didn't use a textbook. What we used was biographies. So it was kind of a people-centered approach with kind of a theme of all men are created equal and how the country has strived to try to actually make that real. So we did a Jefferson biography. We did a unit on slavery, look with former slave narratives from the book To Be a Slave. We did Lincoln's biography and obviously focused on the Civil War and the ending of slavery, and then fast forwarded to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. So kind of looking at people, but also kind of with that underlying theme. So obviously, you know, kind of continued that in a sense in 11th grade, but we use a textbook and we cover a lot more. And, you know, I've had to fill in some gaps in my history knowledge. So it's been fun to read more and attack certain things. I've gotten much more interested, like, for example, in the last year or so, Teddy Roosevelt has become someone I've really looked a lot closer at and found really interesting, and you know, kind of making America what it would be in the 20th century in a lot of ways. So,
what was it about Teddy Roosevelt that made him such a astounding figure in this country's history?
So he transformed the presidency, right? Like, the president wasn't really like by the late 1900s wasn't really like a big deal, right? Like, you know, after Lincoln died, the succeeding presidents obviously, you know, couldn't hold a candle to what Lincoln had to experience and what he was managed to accomplish. And so the presidency kind of faded a little bit, and then here comes Teddy Roosevelt, and he's just like personality, right, that fills like a building, much less a room, right?
Charisma.
And just, you know, kind of like, this is what kind of like what we think of as a president, right? Like Teddy Roosevelt really kind of established. Yeah. You know, and you know, the some of the progressive ideas he had, but then he wasn't really a progressive in a lot of ways. So he's kind of American like that, right? Like, he's full of contradictions and paradoxes, like we are as a country. So so I think in that way, right, like he, you know, and coming at the beginning of the 20th century, like he probably could have been a president, you know, today, much less over 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think in that way, like that personality and that kind of presence, you know, and you know, really, you know, just attracted so many people.
Yeah. One president that I've been kind of interested in learning more about is James Garfield, because I think there's a biography out about him and his assassination, and because that he was part of that line of forgotten presidents after Lincoln, and I don't really know much about those guys like Rutherford B. Hayes and Chester Arthur. No one really knows much about that time, and
Garfield, I think, you know, I shouldn't, you know, I hope I'm not wrong, but I think he was the one, right? Like the doctors basically killed him. It wasn't the gunshot, right?
It wasn't. It was the treatment.
It was the treatment after the gunshot.
Interesting.
That killed him.
Awesome. So U.S. history is your favorite, and you're teaching little world cultures too. What do you guys look at in that course?
So we look at non-Western regions. So after kind of a basic introduction, you know, to a lot of different kind of terms and like sort of areas of life that we'll look at, we go into 5 regions around the world. So right now we just started the Latin American and Caribbean. We'll look at Sub-Saharan Africa. We'll look at North Africa and the Middle East, and then South Asia and East Asia.
In a historical or more contemporary lens?
It's a mishmash, mm-hmm. in a sense, right? Like, so in some ways there's a bit of geography, physical geography, and then human geography. So we definitely look at the cultural aspects. We look at demographics, so we'll spend some time on urbanization. one of the themes of the book that we use is globalization. So we we try to figure out what that means and how that has developed and what it looks like. So there's some economic in there. So it's a mix of historical, economic, political, as well as cultural. Yeah. So it just, and obviously a lot of current events, right? Because there's almost nothing that happens that we can't talk about in world cultures.
I know, exactly.
So in that way, it's kind of neat just to be able to kind of like come in and say, all right, let's read this article and talk about, what that means in the context of what we're studying.
I think that's the best part, and I've been doing that a lot in English, is like, this happened last night. Let's talk about it in terms of, the novel that we're reading or the poem that we're looking into. So I think that helps get some of these students interested, especially from like a hybrid model or on Zoom. If you bring something, hey, this video clip came from last night's debate. Let's talk about it in terms of, today,
I think
history.
Drew was talking about that with you a little bit, right? Like making analogies to things that are in their world kind of deal. Dan Christian was awesome at that.
Yeah.
He was the man. I would go watch his classes and he would, he would compare Dickens and Scrooge, right, to Arthur Modell moving the Browns to Baltimore.
Really?
Right. Like he would make these analogies and the kids would just be like on the edge of their seats and you're sitting there going, how do you think of that? And wow, that's really good.
Yeah. I love that.
And
Cesare was telling me that it would be great to get him on this podcast and talk to him, because I never really got to know him. He left the year that I came in. Mm-hmm. So he is an all-time legend here at Gilman, and he taught that Dante course that everyone who took it loved. Was their favorite class. So Dan Christian, if you're out there, if you're listening, let's get you back here on campus.
Give Jake a ring.
Yeah, give me a ring. Oh, that's great. So, Coach, thinking a little bit about the U.S. history conversation and like the world today, and our talk about leadership in sports. What kind of, this is just a kind of a conversation, but what kind of leader do you think this country needs right now? Because it really is scary. I look at my Twitter feed, I look at the news. I don't know if it's just the election cycle right now, but we need some type of leadership. And I'm teaching the senior elective on leadership, and we're studying Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and we're doing some literature as well. But some of the moral leadership qualities I'm finding are lacking in the current situation here, and I'm wondering what type of leader do you think should really emerge?
Yeah, I think I've thought a lot about leadership, not just recently, but just over the years, and leadership starts with character, right? Like people, you can't force people to follow you, and when you do, it doesn't end up well. Mm-hmm. So I think, I think in some ways what we're seeing from some of our leaders today, right, is not just a reflection, but also a production of the kind of culture we're becoming, right, where everything's either or, this country was built on compromise. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those compromises are unseemly to look at and talk about and think about. That how could they have compromised, for example, on something like slavery? How could they have just kind of allowed that to carry on for the sake of anything else? Mm-hmm. But the reality is, right, you need people, and I read this, I think, in a David Brooks editorial, right? Like you need people on the extremes, right? Because the radicals give you ideas, mm-hmm. and they make you think, and they make you question and challenge conventional wisdom, which is good to challenge. But moderates get things done, mm-hmm. he said. Like the people who are able to find the common ground, right? And to listen, right? And to get and to have the mastery of the language to get people to understand and frankly buy in. Yep. They're the ones who get things done, and you can't do that unless you have something that people can rely on. And so I think what we need from our leadership is also kind of like what we need from our country, which is kind of to allow people to speak their mind, right? Because that's a fundamental philosophy of our country. Mm-hmm. But just because they differ doesn't mean we sort of attack. Sometimes teachers like to say, attack the ideas, not the person. I don't think there's a lot of that goes on, right? Like there's a lot of attacking of people in our political climate and in our general social climate, I think. And so, empathy goes a long way, right? Being true to certain, standards and philosophies, I think goes a long way towards, being a leader. I think, also leaders demonstrate, right? They don't just talk, great book I would recommend. I don't remember, did I give you a copy of this, Legacy?
You told me about it, and
Okay.
I remember the hockey team was reading it, so I was in on those conversations. I roomed with hockey guys in college, but they were talking about the sweep the sheds, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's about the rugby team, the All Blacks, right? Like, and the culture that they've built, which is obviously sort of this hot word in sports, right? Like the culture, team culture, and that kind of stuff. But it's because we care about it, right? Like we care about how people are. We care about, we don't win games because, well, you might win games because you're more talented, but you don't win championships just because you're more talented.
Yeah.
So, so anyone who's interested in sort of leadership, I strongly recommend that book. I think Coach Sheets recommended that. It was one of the summer reading
It's a great
options.
one. I think so, yeah. Yeah, that is a great one, Legacy. And it does talk about just those fundamental values have to hold true. And we talked about the Gilman 5 on this podcast last time, and I think that applies to anyone. You don't have to be a student at Gilman. If you follow that moral code in your life, you probably will emerge as a leader wherever you are, because you need that foundation that people look to and say, that person's doing it right. It's just kind of a natural instinct to say that when you see someone who's honest, who's hardworking, who's respectful, who's humble, right?
And even if you're not a leader, right, you're going to find yourself around people who you want to be around, mm-hmm. as opposed to people who maybe are not the kind of people you want to be around.
And it does rub off too. It's contagious, as we said before. So in sports, I just think that there's so much to learn from playing sports and coaching, and that's why I really like the teacher coach model, which you're a prime example of that. You are the epitome of the teacher coach model. And it is very important, I think.
Yeah, just one of many. Just one of many, and I mean, it's, I don't know. I think one of the things I love about Gilman from being a student, going back to what when you were asking me about being a student, right? It was a place where, I could throw myself into anything and everything, mm-hmm. And I think that was really valuable for me as a kid. And I don't know if it was because of anything that I was experiencing at the time, or just the kind of person I am or was then or was becoming, and I think a lot of that still holds true today. I like to tell people, when they ask me about Gilman, what is it about Gilman? I said, well, I think one of the things about Gilman that's great is the size, right? Like our student body size is such that no matter what you're interested in, what kind of things you like to do, you're going to find someone. We're big enough that you're going to find someone who's like a kindred spirit, mm-hmm. right? And we're also, but we're not so big that you can only do like one thing really well. I heard Ned talking to you about guys that were in the musical while they were also playing lacrosse.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a championship team. Our starting goalie was the lead in the musical in the spring, the same season.
That is insane, because
right?
I know how much work that those musical, the musical production takes.
Yeah. Connor McGee, starting goalie, 2009 championship team, and the lead in the musical. Yeah,
that is amazing. So just wearing those different hats, and that's one of the things that I've said before. That, the reason I really liked Gilman when I first came here is walking through the hallways and how art is celebrated here. There's paintings all over the place. The art program is, it's celebrated, and that's something that I care about that I didn't really get to do much in high school. I don't know if it was the size of my high school or just my own personal, I didn't get into it as much, but here it's it's cool if you're in Mr. Connolly's art class,
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. All that, and that's been, that's it hasn't always been that way, but to Gilman's benefit, right? That's grown tremendously.
Great. Coach Matthews, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. As I said before, you're the epitome of the teacher coach here, and you do it all. You're one of the hardest workers that I've had the opportunity to kind of follow here in my first couple of years as a teacher, and it's been a pleasure to learn from you and talk to you every day and kind of see what you're doing and how you're being a role model for students, for faculty, for young teachers in the Penn program, which we didn't get to talk about much.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming on. It's been great talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a great example too, right? You kind of got to take and run with this, and that's really cool. And I want to thank you for doing that and adding this to the community. And I actually brought something for you.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Let's go.
This is from the depths of my attic, from the stores in the attic. Add to your warm weather. You may need some more warm weather gear.
I need this.
Cold weather gear.
I've been looking for hoodies. Thank you so much.
There you go. Hope that works out.
Appreciate it. Yeah, this is great. I appreciate it. I'm gonna get some stuff in, some Path to Follow gear, which will be coming out. It will be for sale, so everyone look out for that. And
nice.
Coach,
gotta have the merch.
Gotta have the merch. Yes, exactly. Thanks a lot.
You bet.
See you soon.
Okay.